Overcoming Anger and Irritability by William Davies, a self-help guide using cognitive behavioural techniques. Chapter 1. What are irritability and anger? We are probably right to put irritability and anger together because they are so often associated with each other. Nevertheless, they are somewhat different. Consider the following stories. I was in the pub one evening with a couple of friends, just sitting near the back door to the pub talking. It was a November evening and it was quite cold outside. Somebody came through the back door and left it just a little open so that I had to get up and close it. I didn't mind too much. About a quarter of an hour later, somebody else came in and did the same thing. Didn't quite close the door properly. So I got up again and closed it. A little while later, a third person did the same thing. I closed the door but gave him a good hard stare. Mind you, I don't think he noticed because he was walking to the bar by that time, so I was staring at the back of his head. It happened a fourth time a bit later on. The thing is, the self-closing mechanism on the door had broken. Anyway, this time I said to the bloke who'd come in, "Don't you think you should close the door behind you when you come in?" He just looked at me as though I was some kind of oddball and went and ordered himself a drink. It was when the fifth person came in that I really went to town on him. By this time I had sunk probably 4 or 5 pints. He did exactly the same as all the others, left the door just slightly open. The thing that really got me about it was that they don't seem to care. They just seem so intent on getting their own drinks inside them that they don't give a damn about anybody else in the pub. Anyway, something snapped in me. I didn't actually hit the bloke, but I jumped up, started shouting and swearing at him, jabbing my finger in his chest, and generally calling him all the names under the sun. He was only a small bloke, and the funny thing was he had only done exactly the same thing as the first one. Simply left the door a little open. Compare that story, told by a 28-year-old man, Steve, with the following one from David, aged 45. It was a Wednesday evening, and 4 of us went down to town for a meal in an Indian restaurant. That's me, my wife, and the 2 kids. Anyway, we parked the car in a back street. It must have been about 8 o'clock in the evening. Walked round to the restaurant and had a very good meal. It was the first time we'd been there. We were all on good form, had a good laugh, and a joke about everything, even at how thick and new the carpets were, and altogether had a thoroughly good time. Anyway, about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, we just turned the corner of the street we'd parked the car in, when we heard an almighty crash and the sound of breaking glass. Except it hardly sounded like glass. It was a stronger, louder sound than that. We looked down the street and there was some bloke with his head stuck through the passenger window of our car, and another bloke standing by him. I didn't grasp what was happening for a moment. Then I realised that the sound we had heard was the window glass breaking, and these 2 were in the process of stealing the stereo from my car. Anyway, I felt that mixture of stuff that courses through your body when these things happen. Shouted but not very loud, and set off after these 2. One bloke saw me after a couple of seconds and just ran off. That left the guy with his head still through the window, engrossed in prizing my hi-fi, out of the car. He still had his head through the window when I got there. I just grabbed hold of him and pulled him out. I didn't care if his head caught on the bits of broken glass or not, and manhandled him, not at all gently, onto the floor. By this time my wife was there and telling me to take it easy, and one of the kids had already got his mobile phone out and was dialing for the police. The lad I'd got out of the car was never more than 16, but I just had him on the floor and could cheerfully have throttled him. What did they think they were doing, just thinking they could go up to somebody else's property and take it? Anyway, I just sat astride him, threatening him and telling him what a useless piece of machinery he was, until the police came. Half a dozen people must have gone past us during all that, but I couldn't care less. When the police arrived, they did at least seem to take my side, took all the details and took him off in their car. Which of these two stories would you say illustrated irritability, and which one anger? To my mind, irritability is shown in the first one, and anger in the second. But there is another question, perhaps a more important one, posed by these two examples, and that is, which of the two men was justified in his reaction? Or if you think that both were justified in their reactions, which was more justified? The justified test. Myself, I would say the man in the second example was more justified. The man who caught somebody trying to steal his stereo. But maybe I say that because I have been in plenty much the same situation, come back to the car after a nice meal out only to find the window broken and the stereo gone. And I must say, if I had been able to get hold of that person who had done it, just at that instant, I don't know what I would have done to him. So personally, I feel I can't really blame David. On the other hand, I have also inadvertently left a door open and probably irritated somebody thereby, especially if I was the fifth person to have done so that evening. So I would say that perhaps the guy who reacted aggressively in that scene was a bit over-aggressive. Maybe in an ideal world, Steve could have toned it down a bit and simply asked persons 2, 3 and 4 to shut the door after them. But there again, he'd got a few drinks inside him, so possibly his inhibitions were weakened a bit by the time person number 5 came in. And also he said that customer 5 was a small bloke, so perhaps that had a bearing on events too. One of the main judgments we make whenever we see someone behaving in an aggressive or hostile way is whether they are justified in doing so. If we judge that they are justified, then we probably won't describe that person as irritable. We reserve the term irritable for people who are hostile, angry or aggressive without good cause. If we think the person is justified in being angry or aggressive, then we tend to see nothing wrong with that. So if we see David as justified in his anger, we probably won't blame him for pinning the thief to the ground until the police arrived. We might see that as a proportionate response. If, on the other hand, he had started banging the 16-year-old's head up and down on the pavement while loudly cursing him, we might have seen that as disproportionate and unjustified. So if we really want a definition of irritability, it will be something along the lines of an unjustified negative response to a situation. Unjustified in whose eyes? In ours, of course. And therein lies a problem, because everybody has a different judgment as to what is justified and what isn't. What is more, sometimes our judgment goes a little hazy. I can still remember the first time I saw the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in which Nurse Ratched torments a group of mentally ill patients led by Jack Nicholson. Certainly the patients were full of antipathy towards Nurse Ratched after about an hour of the film, but not half as much as the audience. At this point, after Nurse Ratchet's particular savage treatment of one of the patients, Jack Nicholson could stand it no longer, grabbed hold of her, had her on the floor and was throttling the life out of her. Half the audience in the cinema was on its feet, shouting encouragement and just hoping he would finish the job before the 2 male nurses rushing to Mrs. Ratchet's assistance could get there. He didn't. The authorities got the better of him, and we all trudged unhappily out of the cinema. Even though Nurse Ratchet's behaviour was extreme, Perhaps Jack Nicholson's response was somewhat disproportionate. Of course, in a case like this, our judgment is clouded by the events being on the silver screen rather than in reality. But this temporary clouding of judgment is exactly the problem, because unfortunately it happens not just on the silver screen, but in real life as well. On those occasions, we get repeatedly remorseful and self-critical. We say we overreacted or don't know what got hold of us. We feel that our response was out of all proportion to the event. It was not justified. These are themes that will run throughout the book. How do we get ourselves, always or nearly always, to respond to negative events in a way that is in proportion to them? In a way that we and others would say is justified. It is worth lingering a little on these questions of definition. The word irritability implies a minor kind of response on the part of the irritable person, probably verbal, usually not physically aggressive. Even so, we tend to react against irritable people because we think that their response is not justified. Anger, on the other hand, might lead to a much more forceful response. The man who pinned the thief to the floor was angry. Nevertheless, we don't necessarily react against people who are being angry so long as we see their anger as justified. In fact, we sometimes like to see people getting angry so long as they are on our side. Margaret Thatcher was often referred to as handbagging her counterparts from other European countries in order to stick up for those in Britain perceived as their rights. I, for one, never heard many people complaining about that at the time. Her successor, John Major, on the other hand, was painted as a much more grey character, literally in the case of the satirical spitting image programme. So grey, in fact, that he would be unlikely to get openly angry with too many people. Whether this perception was accurate is another matter, but accurate or not, it seemed to count against him. What is more, this negative perception of John Major was exacerbated by rumours that he could also be rather irritable in private, a shade on the snappish side when perhaps it wasn't warranted. Again, whether this perception was true is another matter, but it does illustrate the point that what people dislike is not the fact of other people getting angry, it's the fact of other people reacting in a way that is not justified or out of proportion to the situation. Anger, irritability, and frustration. Just to finish off this chapter, see what you make of the following two stories. The first was related to me by Anne, a woman of 34, telling me about how she was getting on with her 12-year-old daughter. The biggest rumpus Rachel and I have had this week was Tuesday evening. Of course, it's halfway through the holidays, and she always gets on my nerves in the holidays anyway. But Tuesday was particularly bad because I'd been going on at her all day to tidy her room. It was a terrible mess. She could hardly set foot in it without tripping over something, and it smells when you walk in there. I'm sure she's got some food that's going off buried under all her clothes on the floor. Anyway, I'd been going on at her all day to tidy her room, and she just wouldn't do it. There was always something she had to do first, so it was about 7 o'clock in the evening. I was downstairs and Rachel was upstairs. I'd just got back from the shops. I'd only been out 5 or 10 minutes. Anyway, the house was quiet, so I thought that maybe Rachel had decided that she'd better do what her mum says and get on with tidying her room. So I went upstairs ready to praise her and tell her what a good girl she was and how pleased I was with her and how much better the room looked and so on. When I got up there, I could see that Rachel wasn't in her room and the place looked just as much of a tip as it ever had. Anyway, to cut a long story short, There was Rachel in the bathroom, sitting in the bath washing her hair. Well, I just flew at her. It was absolutely the last straw. She hasn't lifted a finger to help all holidays. She can't even be bothered to tidy her own room, and there she is, sitting in the bath like a little madam, washing her hair with my shampoo. I just ranted and raved at her for a good 10 or 15 minutes, just shouting and screaming. All the frustrations of the holidays came out in that time. The poor kid looked absolutely petrified, and as for what the neighbours thought, I've no idea. Justified? Perhaps not. And what about this one, in which Paul 46 told me about his son John, also aged 12? You see, the thing is, all I've ever tried to do is to do my best for him, and I've learnt the hard way that if you don't pay proper attention to education and schooling, then you're the worse off for it as you get older. So I'm always going on at him about how important it is to pay attention in school and do his homework properly when he gets home. But he knows better, of course, and he tells me that he can concentrate better doing his homework in front of the television. And I've seen him doing it. He sits there, mouth half open, staring at the screen, and just every now and then again, looking at what he's meant to be doing. And he thinks he's got me fooled doing it. He thinks that I believe he's doing his homework. So anyway, Monday was like that, Tuesday was the same, just the same as any other day. And on Wednesday I told him to show me his books after he'd packed them away and said he'd done all the homework he had to do. And so I was looking at his exercise book for maths. He was meant to have done 20 sums in it. And he's got all the numbers 1 to 20 down there, and some of them he'd done, though God knows whether they were right or not. But I could see that more than half the sums he was meant to have done he just hadn't. He hadn't even tried to. There was just blank spaces where the answers were meant to be. So I saw red and I just walloped him. He was sitting just opposite from me, looking stupid and frightened, and I just walloped him. I hit him straight across the face, so he all but fell off the chair, and I didn't waste my breath on him. I just told him to get straight upstairs to bed, and I've not spoken to him since, and that was 3 days ago. Justified? Well, again, maybe not. But it is all too easy to be critical of those two parents, or say that their reactions were out of proportion to what triggered them, and therefore were not justified. Sometimes people get to such a pitch that they can no longer tell what's justified and what isn't, and both of those parents described quite truthfully genuinely wanting to do the best for their children. Sometimes the level of frustration that builds up is unbearable. This was not the first such incident for either of these parents. Both had tried all sorts of tactics without success, and now they saw themselves still as having no success, but also having been pushed into doing things they didn't like doing.